Okay, let's be honest here. First of all, one could argue that Obama resonated more because the people chose him to be the Democratic nominee for the presidency of the United States of America, as opposed to somebody backdooring their way into that position. Let's just be honest about it. You had Biden. I know that you supported Biden. Obviously, you spoke about his mental acuity and all of that other stuff, but we all saw what we saw. Before the debate on June 27th, when the debate happened, and by the time that was exposed, you then waited 3 weeks after that before he decided to walk away, but it was too late for anybody else to get in. So Kamala Harris, who didn't resonate during the primaries in 2020, couldn't even get to Iowa, suddenly is the Democratic nominee. And then you roll up at the convention in Chicago, and everybody's like, she's a rock star. So it was like, wait a minute, how'd that happen? I don't know how that happened.
That was Stephen A. Smith on Real Time with Bill Maher this past Friday, telling the truth about the Kamala Harris campaign, the hysteria and the phony excitement about her. And wouldn't you know it, now that the election is over, Stephen A. Smith is saying exactly what I was telling you during the campaign, what I've been telling you since day one, which is all of the hype, all of the love, and all of the worship of Kamala Harris was completely fake, completely manufactured, unrealistic, and would fall apart like the house of cards that it actually was. And now that the election is over, Stephen A. Smith and a bunch of other left-wing people are telling the truth. That being said, of course, there's a bunch of people that are in denial about this. You still have left-wing people saying that Kamala ran a conservative campaign, did what the Republicans wanted, and if only she was more progressive, she would have won the election, despite the fact that her numbers started falling off immediately when she started talking to the press before she started pivoting her positions to more centrist-style positions. And in reality, the only reason she had a polling bump was due to the 6 weeks of media propaganda when she refused to talk to them, and they were just ascribing all this amazingness and how everybody was excited to her, when in reality she was just polling as a generic Democrat would. And as soon as people got to see Kamala again, they ended up hating her. Now, we're going to break this down, we're going to talk about this, but before we do, I will remind you that on February 15th and February 16th, I will be at DebateCon in New York, New Jersey. I'm actually debating on the 16th, so please get your tickets if you're in the area and you want to see me in person. Link in the top of the description.
So Kamala Harris, who didn't resonate during the primaries in 2020, couldn't even get to Iowa, suddenly is the Democratic nominee. And then you roll up at the convention in Chicago, and everybody's like, she's a rock star. So it was like, wait a minute, how'd that happen? I don't know how that happened.
So look, I'm not a huge fan of Stephen A. Smith and all his different various political commentary, and honestly, there's a lot of times Stephen A. Smith gave sports commentary when I used to watch ESPN, where I thought he was ridiculous, his shtick was over the top, and obviously the man was absurd, and honestly a caricature of a sports analyst. That being said, all of those features right here are in fact present, but they totally work in this scenario, and you could see that he completely won over the crowd by making fun of Kamala Harris, and that just shows you how bad she is as a candidate.
And as a woman, there's a balance to be struck between being tough and being a bitch. Turn that off.
That she is essentially the punchline among the left wing right now, among the Democrats right now, along the mainstream media right now, because they all understand what they did to the American people, what they tried to do to them, which was essentially lie about everything related to her, pretend that people actually like this woman, when in reality, we knew, based on the fact that she couldn't even make it to the first primary state of the Democratic primary, that she never had any political skill, any appeal, or anything of the sort. In fact, if you read Lucky, how Joe Biden barely won the presidency, what you find out is even the Biden team didn't want her. Essentially, Biden had screwed himself over by saying that he had to pick a woman as VP. Then the Black Lives Matter riots happened, and Kamala Harris was considered the highest ranking black Democrat. Therefore, Biden had to pick her, and he went through Stacey Abrams, Karen Bass. He even went through a bunch of other different people like Susan Rice before ultimately having to pick Kamala Harris, and they've hated her ever since. And this is one of the reasons why Joe Biden seemed like he was just trying to sabotage her in the election in 2024 after he was forced out of the race in favor of her.
So you're looking at all of those things and you're saying Yes, I voted for her. A lot of people voted for her. But in the end, we end up feeling like damn fools because we supported it. We fell for the okie doke, as they say. You know she did. If you had a primary, the likelihood is that she would not have been the Democratic nominee. And you can't say that about Trump in this side. You can't.
So look, this is obviously 100% true, and what's hilarious about this is he's sitting right next to Ro Khanna. Ro Khanna represents the Silicon Valley district, so he's in and around the area where Kamala Harris was from, and he's just laughing up a storm at the person that his party put forward because they know it was a hoax. They knew it was a joke from start to finish, and they knew that Kamala Harris was an absolutely terrible candidate, had no reason to be president except for her own ego, which, by the way, is true of the overwhelming majority of presidential candidates. Let's be 100% real about that. But she had no agenda. She had nothing that she wanted to do, and that was demonstrated to us with her as vice president because she was essentially a ghost in that position. She never advocated for anything really and was an embarrassment throughout that entire time. But Stephen A. Smith was not just on fire with this particular interaction. There was a part of the discussion where he talks about the Lake and Riley Act, and he honestly humiliates Ro Khanna in that particular exchange, and we gotta go to the clip so you can see it.
Okay, so let's talk about the border one. Because ICE is now detaining people. This is a lot of people concerned. The Lake and Riley Act, I'm sure you voted on that. I think you voted no. Okay, but it did pass with 46 Democrats in the House voted for it. And in the Senate, it passed 64 to 35, so I think about 12 Democrats there. This is a law that says that ICE can detain any illegal who is charged, arrested, or convicted of a crime.
So the setup for this particular segment is Bill Maher talking about the Lake and Riley Act, talking about how Ro Khanna, of course, voted against it, and saying that I'm sure he had his reasons for that. And if you guys don't remember, Lake and Riley was murdered by an illegal immigrant who was actually arrested for child endangerment in the city of New York, released same day automatically due to bail reform, ended up in Georgia, was arrested in Georgia as well, was also released because that particular area had sanctuary city kind of protections, even though they're supposed to be illegal in the state of Georgia, and ultimately he ended up brutally murdering Lake and Riley, and thus we have the law named for her. And by the way, I have always said this, and I will repeat this, and I know this is going to make me sound maybe unpopular to you guys out there in the audience, but I'm generally not in favor of laws that are named for individual cases. I think they have a lot of problems. I would rather them just have the law, but I understand how American politics work, and people need to have something to emotionally attach to certain pieces of legislation in order to fight it. But in this particular legislation, it says that if you're an illegal migrant and you are arrested for theft, you're arrested for these other crimes or whatever, you can be held by ICE, you can be deported from the country, regardless of how your case adjudicates, because again, you're an illegal migrant that's caught up in the criminal justice system. And had this been applied in this particular case, guess what? That illegal migrant would have been deported. In addition to that, I will also point out that we had a revelation from the New York Post from the woman that this guy was married to, that they essentially got married in order to defraud the asylum system. So yeah, we had a pattern of behavior that should indicate that that person shouldn't have been in the country, and ultimately he ended up committing a murder.
Now, Ruben Gallego, who we've had on the show a number of times, and I think has bigger ambitions, and he's now the senator from Arizona, he voted for it. He said, I'm bringing the perspective of working class Latinos from Arizona. That perspective, I think, has been missing. And he talks about people who are largely out of touch with where your average Latino is. It sounds like he's calling out people like you who voted no.
So Bill Maher ends up bringing up that they have the Arizona senator, a Democrat, who voted in favor of this, and one of the reasons why he voted in favor of this is because he wanted to represent the average working class Latino. Now, you guys know that Latinos did move dramatically towards President Trump in this past election, but even more interesting, Latinos on the border, and this is specifically visible in the state of Texas, voted even more dramatically for Trump than national Latinos as a whole, because these people are experiencing these problems. In addition to that, I will also point out that when you're releasing criminals over and over again back into the community, very often those Latinos are going back into the Latino community. So if you're a regular, ordinary Latino American that just wants to work hard, that just wants to contribute to the country, and all of a sudden illegal immigrants are being released back into your community to steal from you again again, to attack you again, you're going to have a problem with that. So the Arizona senator's statement makes perfect sense on why he voted for this, why he's against this. And I know a lot of people say, oh, Laken Riley, white girl murdered, a lot of people on the left, by the way, therefore there's a racial component to this. But the fact of the matter is, most of the time, the people who are being released by these soft on crime policies go back to the same communities with people of the same ethnic origin as them, and that's where they reoffend. Honestly, Laken Riley's a bit of an outlier in this regard, in that she was a white girl that was going to college for nursing and all of that, but most of the time, this impacts the Latinos.
I like Ruben. There are a lot of Latino. I do. I think he ran a hell of a race. But there are a lot of Latino leaders who also voted no. Here's the basic thing in this country. If you're convicted of a sex offense, of a violent offense, absolutely, you should be deported. But if you're just arrested, we are a country in which we have due process.
So first of all, I want to point out something that nobody is really highlighting in Ro Khanna's statement right there. And by the way, this is one of the reasons why you can't trust these left-wing progressives. You can't trust these people who call themselves Justice Democrats, because he just said, if you're convicted of a sexual crime or a violent crime, then you should be deported from this country. But what about the property crimes? Because that's what's specifically in the Laken Riley Act. And there seems to be a belief among people in the Democratic Party that if you're an illegal migrant to the United States, you should be able to steal and burglarize with impunity without any consequences, and that is very well represented in the state of California. Remember, we talked about that snake burglar time and time again who was convicted of 76 felony burglaries, and then he was released because those are considered non-violent crimes, which is what Ro Khanna doesn't believe should be eligible for deportation. And had that been an illegal migrant, because of the sanctuary city and sanctuary state laws in California, that 76-time felon would have been released back into the community to offend again. Now, in that particular case, that was not an illegal migrant. He wasn't even Latino, for those of you who are wondering. I mean, again, I'll probably put the thumbnail up on screen, but had that been true, Ro Khanna wants that person in the United States of America, in the state of California. And again, he kind of slipped that by with, oh, if you have to be convicted of these serious violent felonies, otherwise you have free reign in the United States of America, which is absurd.
You should have a trial. I think that's a reasonable position. I think most people can agree also that, yes, let's deport convicted felons, convicted criminals, but let's not deport our nannies and students or dental hygienists who've been living here for years and have kids in communities. We can have a common sense position on this.
So then Ro Khanna ends up going, oh, let's not deport the nannies and the students and the dental hygienists and all of that. But Stephen A. Smith is going to come in and he's going to basically humiliate Ro Khanna right on this stage. And the crowd is going to cheer for it, which is one of the most interesting things.
I get that. That makes a lot of sense. But there's a flip side. So, for example, if I remember correctly, based on my research, in Sacramento in 2023, there was a law passed in terms of empowering the governor of California to really force environmentalists and the courts to move quickly, like 270 days, if I remember correctly, something along those lines. Why do I bring something like that up with a subject like this? Because here in your state, they can drag their feet and prolong certain things. And as a result of that, things don't get done nearly as fast as they should. When we're talking about immigration and we're talking about immigrants who may be criminals, you're talking about them being arrested. Let's have due process. But if it takes too damn long to address it, that pisses people off. That's one of the problems that exist in this country.
So right here, Stephen A. Smith starts off by saying, look, what you're saying makes sense, and it sounds like it makes sense, but here's the flip side of this. In the state of California, and he gives an example of environmental restrictions, you take too long to do anything. So in particular cases like the one that he's talking about in this hypothetical, what if you arrest somebody, they're arrested for a serious violent crime, and you just let them out because, you know, bail reform and all these different other pieces of legislation that cater to the criminal, and then people are waiting as that process is being adjudicated, and then after they're convicted or not convicted of that original crime, but let's say they are convicted, so we align with Ro Khanna's scenario, then they get additional due process on whether or not they're able to stay in the United States of America. That seems to be rather absurd.
You're looking at stuff and you're like, okay, you arrested him. Was he in jail? All right, you let him out. Recidivism is an issue in this country. You let somebody, you arrest them, you're letting them out the same day, stuff like that. You got law enforcement officials that are getting discouraged because they're looking at it and they're saying, wait a minute, why are we out here risking our life and taking care of this stuff when y'all are just letting people out? You got to handle business. And a lot of times we hear about the red tape and all of that stuff, and you're talking about a candidate right now who's not going to be the president of the United States now. He's sitting up there and he's talking about expediting the process at every turn. Let's just get stuff done. Let's just get it done. Now, I don't know if I trust that. I don't blame you for not trusting it. But we have to understand the American people are saying, you know what, enough's enough. We've tried it that way. We've been doing it that way for decades. We sick of y'all. Let's wait. Let's go through the process. Let's arrest somebody. Let's let them out. Let's put them back out on the streets. Oh, let's make sure they have due process. You think somebody wants to hear about due process with somebody that's in this country illegally? I want to hear that. You in the country illegally. Hell with your process. Yeah. You got the audacity to admit a crime after you got here illegally? We ain't trying to hear that. Nobody's trying to hear that. So they're saying, wait a minute, what are you going to do about it? Like, where is the common sense in that?
I mean, what Stephen A. Smith says right there makes 100% sense. And again, I'm not a huge fan of Stephen A. Smith. He's not somebody that I go to for political commentary, but the fact of the matter is, the idea that you would have the audacity to commit additional crimes in the United States of America, and in Ro Khanna's imagination, you're allowed to commit all of the property crimes that you want. That's why he named very specific felonies. And by the way, even in the state of California, they actually have a vote on whether or not you're going to comply with ICE deportation orders, even if they're sex crimes, and they vote no on that. So that's not even included. So Ro Khanna's not even being honest there. And yeah, people are sick of that. They don't want to hear about all this different various due process for these illegal migrants. You came into the country illegally. You don't have the proper documentation. If you want due process, you go straight to the immigration courts. They send you back to your country, and then you deal with your issues back in your own nation. The idea that we have to give all of these privileges, rights, and immunities to these illegals makes no sense at all, especially when you consider the fact that they did not go through the process to get into this country. Essentially, what this does is devalue citizenship in the United States of America, which people like Ro Khanna are perfectly fine with, and I don't think that is something that we need to do. We have enough of our own criminals in the United States of America right here already that we have to deal with, that the state of California, places like New York, and all over the country are releasing over and over and over again just to reoffend. We don't need to import additional criminals. And again, this is the logic of the Democratic elite as represented by this progressive representative, Ro Khanna. But of course, I want to know what you guys think about this down in the comments below. As usual, if you like this video, you guys can show them by leaving a like. You can subscribe for more content, follow me on the social medias, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about the madness of Ro Khanna and Stephen A. Smith coming correct. Till next time.